It was revealed this week that the government may be on the brink of renationalising the East Coast Main Line. Labour's front bench has been clear about its aspiration to renationalise not just rail, but energy, the post office and even water. This weekend, the party held a conference to discuss the expansion of the Preston model, but others remain less convinced by its wisdom.
This idea is very, very popular nowadays, both on the political right, people like Trump are promoting it, and on the political left. But really it's just a failure to understand the benefits of trade. The idea that you can enrich yourself with a border. So I draw a line around an area, and somehow that will make us better off, is magical thinking. How you become better off is through becoming more productive. These ideas that are tricks for becoming richer, that involve boundaries. It's an abiding fantasy, but it is a fantasy.
Well, the doubters may doubt, but in a post-Carillion world, Labour is convinced public opinion is pulling in its direction.
It's quite heavy.
Well, to help us all understand more about Labour's plans, I'm joined by Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, Andrew MacDonald, who's in Newcastle. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
John MacDonald says that the plans to renationalise energy, water, rail would cost absolutely nothing. Now, that sounds too good to be true. Explain to us how that could work.
Well, in terms of the railways, we would be bringing those rail services back into public ownership at no cost at all. We would simply take them back once those franchises expire, and that would be a very considerable savings of at least £1 billion per annum once we've got all of those services back under the public ownership.
But then you're going to have to find about £70 billion for the water industry, nearly $40 billion for the national grid. How can that cost absolutely nothing?
Because you'll be acquiring an asset, you'll be exchanging bonds for shares, you'll be borrowing that money, you'll be acquiring the asset, you'll be paying that back from the revenues that you derive from those businesses over time, and you'll be able to keep costs down for the consumer.
So you'll be adding to the national debt, and you will have to pay interest on that debt, which you will do out of the revenue that you get from the companies. But you also say that this is going to cost less for consumers, that bills are going to come down. It's going to be one or the other, isn't it?
Well, no, not if you've got £13.5 billion of the dividends paid out. If you can run things on a not-for-profit basis, then it can ensure that customers can get the best possible returns.
Oh, well, not-for-profit might be good for customers, but that doesn't sound very good for paying back the interest on the loans that you took out in order to buy the organisations in the first place.
We've heard John MacDonald express the analogy about having a mortgage over a property. You've acquired the asset, you've got the income derived from renting it out, it pays for the asset, and you've still got it. So it makes consummate sense to hold those assets and make them work for the benefit of our citizens, rather than for the benefit of shareholders.
That everybody can understand. That's a good one. If interest rates rise after you've bought that house and you're renting it out, it's very possible that your costs could rise above what you're deriving from the rental income. We know that interest rates are on the way up. The Bank of England have told us that. There's every possibility, isn't there, that the interest you'll be paying to have acquired these organisations won't cover, the profits simply won't cover the costs.
Well, it's no different to the position now. If water companies or energy companies are financed, they've got those structures in place, the rate of interest that they pay on their financing is passed through to the consumer ultimately.
Well, I'll tell you how it's different now, because under your system, it would be passed to the taxpayer, presumably. If any of these industries were to start making a loss, you weren't generating the money that you needed, who picks up the tab for that?
Well, have they made a loss since they were privatised? They haven't. They've made very great profits for a whole range of energy and water
why have Stagecoach given up the East Coast
companies.
franchises? Because they've lost £200 million.
Well, if you want to talk about the East Coast franchise, that actually just shows how the franchising system is completely and utterly flawed and should be abandoned. And this
but if the government-run East Coast line lost £200 million, who would be on the hook for that money? The taxpayer.
Hang on, sir. When the government last ran East Coast Main Line, they ran it at a profit. It brought monies into the Treasury. So we've got a good history about running the railways correctly and not having this bailout to Richard Branson and Brian Souter and the rest of them, or seeing the dividends and profits overseas to Nederlander Spoorwegen or Deutsche Bahn, the state-owned companies of continental Europe. We want to put an end to that and make sure that we run our railways for the benefit of the public. It's a public service ultimately.
All right, well, let's look at one company, Bristol Energy, that looks like the kind of company you're advocating. It's been set up locally, it's committed to ethical behaviour, giving best deals to people who can least afford to heat their homes. There's no shareholders, so nobody's taking a profit out of it. It's lost more than $2 million over 2 years and doesn't expect to be profitable until 2021. That doesn't sound like a great deal for the taxpayer if that's how you're going to run the national grid.
Well, it depends what the profitability is in 2021. I mean, if they're recouping those losses and they've got a trajectory of growth and greater incomes, they would look at that and say that was successful. But
hang on, you're saying a Labour government could nationalise all of these industries?
They got tax breaks, they got public capital to set them up in the first instance. They were heavily subsidised in the first instance so they could then go on and enjoy the benefits of private enterprise. And that does not benefit the consumer or the taxpayer or the citizen, however you wish to describe it. And that's what we're about.
The consumer and the taxpayer may be the same person, but they have a different financial relationship with these companies. What comes first? Using any profits or revenue to pay off the debt you've incurred to acquire these assets, or cutting bills for consumers? What would you do first?
You do both. If you've got that income, you can use it for those purposes.
If you've got enough income, you can. But if you have to make a choice, which one do you do? Do you cut energy bills, or do you repay the debt?
Well, those that have benefited from privatisation have had the benefit of not only using that money to pay the debt that they incurred to buy the assets, they're now using it to make dividend payments out to their shareholders. So it quite clearly can be done, and we want to be in that position so it works for the benefit of people, not for corporate entities.
And of course, the shareholders who you describe aren't all millionaire individuals. Actually, a lot of this is owned by pension funds, into which all of us, many workers' pensions are held. Can you guarantee that you will reimburse them at full market value so that nobody whose pension is invested in any of these utilities is going to lose out?
Well, of course, the market value is the market value at the time that these assets are acquired. So that's John McDonnell's made that clear, that they will be acquired at that proper,
but not for cash in exchange for government bonds.
At proper rate. But they're still in that strong position of having that value fully reflected. But of course, what is happening is that those as consumers, because not everybody's a shareholder, it means that there's greater equity for all of the population, not just a narrow segment of it. And surely that's got to be for the benefit of everybody.
Okay, well, Andy McDonald, thanks very much for talking to us this morning.